Here's a short story for you guys. When I was a wee lad, World War II and the idea of reenacting was so cool to me. I ran into one issue though with World War II gear, specifically with camo patterns that were used. All the information was never in one centralized place, and I would often have to go through countless sources to even come close to a conclusion. Being someone who loved to be spoon-fed information, this was quite annoying. Yes, there are hundreds of videos on SS patterns, but nothing on one of my favorite patterns of the 20th century. What is this pattern? Well, that would be Splittermuster. This specific pattern has a huge significance in the history of German camo patterns. However, I could only ever find one or two single videos briefly explaining the history of the pattern. So now, after hours of research, I have compiled a video so you, the viewer, don't have to go and search through countless websites to decipher actual dates and such. So sit back, fellow viewers, and here comes the plane. This is Splittermuster. Ooh, weird, this title has an A at the end. Is that a typo? Something I missed during editing? If you still think it is, that's so silly because why would I even address that in the video? Ignoring the A though for a brief moment, why is Splittermuster apparently such a pivotal pattern, and why is it so important as I claimed in the intro? Well, Splittermuster was the first German camo pattern that was mass-produced. Buntfarbendruck 31 was the original name for what we know as Splittermuster. This name change makes it much easier to say for YouTube videos made by non-German speakers, so I'm glad they considered that. A few other names though that this is known as is Here's Splittermuster, Splittertarn, Splittermuster 31, and Splittermustertarn. For this video, I will be referring to it as Splittermuster. This pattern was proposed in 1931 and then introduced into the German military in 1932. The pattern itself consists of a disruptive zigzag pattern of wood brown and medium green polygons printed on a tan or gray background. The background pattern uses larger brown polygons than green ones. On top of this, it features dark green vertical dashes that are applied. These I'm going to refer to as raindrops. The use of these random dashes is to break up the user's silhouette. So how did the Germans come up with this pattern? According to documentation of the process, it's pretty simple. Let's take our World War I M18 pattern, an iconic Battlefield 1 camo. Now let's throw on some rain lines. This polygon pattern then quickly saw some color change. The ochre color in the pattern was replaced and made into a gray-beige color. This was then revised to give us the Splittermuster we know today. So now let's address that typo you might have seen with the random A. Obviously, it isn't a typo, but what does it actually mean? The A designation is for who used it. Originally, Splittermuster was made for the Reichswehr. Now you might be curious, who is that? The Reichswehr was what was left of the Imperial Army after World War I. It is best compared to a defense force rather than a true army. With the start of World War II and the birth of the Wehrmacht, Splittermuster was quickly issued to almost all of the Heer. As I had also mentioned, this was the first mass-produced German camouflage pattern. So what was it first used on? The first documented use of Splittermuster is on the German Zeltbahn, aka their quarter tents. Inspired by the Italian-made Telemimetico tent covers, the Germans applied this pattern to their Zeltbahns. The Zeltbahn had the pattern printed on both sides, one being a lighter tan than the other, which was a darker shade, best compared to a grayish tan. Here's some photos of real-life uses of the Zeltbahn. So another official use of the pattern began around 1942. This was seen with the Heer smock and the helmet covers for the Stahlhelms. Instead of being two-sided with different shades of Splittermuster, these articles had one side printed in the pattern while the other side was left white, the white being for snow. Another official piece would come out in April 1942 was their Winteranzug suit. This suit included a padded winter jacket, trousers, hood, and mittens. Just like the smock and the helmet covers, these articles were printed with Splittermuster on one side while leaving the other side white. However, only a small amount of these Winteranzug suits were made. So it might seem odd that I call these pieces quote-unquote official. What I mean by that is that many garments and items in Splittermuster were field-made or field-tailored. They were done personally by soldiers and were not mass-produced. Some items that were made this way were the service dress uniforms, parachute jump smocks, field jackets, rucksacks, and panzer jackets. Most of these articles were made by using fabric from the Zeltbahns. So a thing you might know about me if you're a returning viewer is that I love niche things. What I'm about to show you is one of the most niche things with camo patterns. Something that is hardly ever talked about, especially in English. These are the Heer Splittermuster variants. To start off, this is Splittermuster Braun. How is this pattern different? On the light side of regular Splittermuster, the green polygons were replaced with a reddish-brown color. This pattern was likely a trial pattern, however, it was still produced in small quantities, making it quite rare, but very cool to see. Here's a custom-made jumpsuit with the brown pattern. The next pattern shown here is Splittertarn umgekehrte Farben. This pattern is also known as Reversal Splittertarn. The difference between this pattern and Splittermuster A is that the brown and green polygons are flipped. This leaves a pattern with larger green polygon shapes and smaller brown ones. This pattern was likely an experimental pattern and is only found in photos on winter uniforms. A fascinating addition to these niche patterns came from the German fear of infrared night vision being used by the US. This fear produced a pattern called Liebermuster. However, it also gave us another Splittertarn variant to talk about in this video. The pattern you see right now on the screen might look very familiar to regular Splittermuster, but just dirty. This pattern is recognized as Splittertarn mit Carbon Überdruck. While one source shows the pattern with a much darker black ink splotches, I couldn't find anything personally on it. Rather, it looks like that many of the Zeltbahns were treated with this black carbon ink to help conceal against the use of IR light. The black was a very stark contrast, causing a better breakup in the pattern under IR. This was seen in 1945 and was quite rare, likely since the war was coming to an end. This last pattern may look very familiar for being such a niche pattern. The nickname may sound childish, but it is called Splittertarn with fluffy edges. The pattern follows the same colors of the original pattern, however the edges are blurred. This pattern looks much like Splittermuster and is likely a transitional pattern. In 1943, this pattern was produced in large quantities. Okay, so this pattern has a B. Clearly there is a reason behind that. The pattern your pupils see right now on the screen is Luftwaffe Splittermuster, also known as Bundeswehr and Splittermuster B in German literature. This pattern is assumed to be used no earlier than 1941, hence the 41 at the end of the name. So what makes this pattern so different and special compared to the Heer's version of Splittermuster? Splittermuster B is a much more complicated pattern. It's got a lot going on. If you look closely, when compared to Splittermuster A, the pattern is much smaller as well. No, this isn't just me being bad at editing. The pattern consists of many more polygons and corners than the Heer pattern, and more green raindrops to break up and blur the pattern. Personally, I feel when most people think of Splittermuster, they think of the Fallschirmjäger pattern more commonly than the Wehrmacht pattern. So what was this pattern used on? The Splittermuster B pattern was used officially on many more items than the Splittermuster A pattern. The most known and seen were on the Jumpsmock, the crude German nickname being Knochensack, meaning bone sack. It was also used on field division jackets used by the Luftwaffe, helmet covers used for the M38 jump helmet, FG-42 bandoliers, and grenade bags. This pattern was discontinued in 1944. Unlike the Heer pattern, there are hardly any documented prototypes or variants of this pattern. The only one I could find was quite similar to the Heer one. That would be the Luftwaffe Splittermuster umgekehrte Farben pattern. Similar to the Heer pattern, this reversal Splittermuster saw the greens and browns swapped, resulting in larger green polygon shapes and smaller brown polygon shapes. It is rumored that this pattern was used for the Mediterranean theater and or the North African theater. Splittermuster umgekehrte Farben was only printed in 1943. So when did the Germans stop using Splittermuster? The answer might be different than what you expected. The official uniform use did not end in World War II, but rather in the late 50s and early 60s. I myself did not know this until doing some digging around on the internet. The following portion of this video could not be done without Collection Steve. This person has very well documented the variations of Splittermuster used by the early Bundeswehr, and that could not be cooler for this video. So what were these Bundeswehr variants and when were they used? The variants used by the Bundeswehr were Standard Wehrmacht pattern, Blue variant, Green variant, Brown dominant in the broad pattern, and Green dominant in the broad pattern. Supposedly there's also a palm pattern.
However, I wasn't able to find any verified information on this.
So let's actually start with the Standard Wehrmacht pattern. Since we've already discussed this standard pattern enough today, I feel it would be pointless to explain it again. So unfortunately, I don't have any photographs of this camo pattern either. However, it was lately phased out for being too close of a resemblance to that of the Third Reich Splittermuster. This pattern had a stark difference in color, though compared to the blue and green variants. The assumption is that this pattern was used in 1955 for only infantry uniforms. Next up is probably one of my favorite Bundeswehr adaptations of Splittermuster. This pattern is called Splittermuster Blue, and if you couldn't tell, it is because of the bluish undertones the back color takes. Splittermuster Blue appears to be printed in both 1956 and 1957 based on dates on clothing the pattern is on. The blue pattern was used on infantry uniforms, much like Splittermuster pattern, but was also used on the 1956 and 1957 Fallschirmjäger uniforms. Another Bundeswehr adaptation of this camo, with similar dates and uses, was Splittermuster Green. There's not a large difference, but obviously based with that name, it has a much more green undertone. However, it also had slightly larger raindrops. This pattern was seen on the Fallschirmjäger and Bundeswehr field uniforms in both 1956 and 1957. The next patterns are the broad Splittertarn patterns. This had two color variants, which are brown and green dominant variants. The key points in these patterns are the much larger shapes and the much larger raindrops. Both appear to have been manufactured in 1957. Here we have the brown broad pattern. Note that the larger polygon shapes are brown, and the size of the raindrops have increased. It appears to only have been used on the Fallschirmjäger uniforms of the Bundeswehr. Next up, we have the green variant. This pattern appears again with much larger polygon shapes being green, hence the name, and larger raindrops. This pattern was also only used on Fallschirmjäger uniforms. As I had mentioned before, I sadly do not have the photos of the Bundeswehr palm pattern, so this concludes the extent of adaptations used by the Bundeswehr. Splittermuster, like many other German camos, was also adopted by multiple other countries during and after World War II. Splittermuster can be separated into two camo families, the Splinter camo family and the Raindrop camo family. In this video, I will only be explaining the Splinter camo family. A separate video will be made in the future about the Raindrop camo family, and I promise that will come out soon. In 1938, Switzerland copied the German Splittermuster A camo pattern and adopted it into their military. Throughout the middle and later half of the 20th century, Bulgaria produced a handful of camouflage patterns in the unique Splittermuster-inspired designs, which consisted of various shades of green and reddish-brown on a generally beige background. During the 1950s, the French were inspired to create a small number of camo patterns loosely inspired from their prior occupier Splittermuster. These patterns consist of a dark green or gray geometric shapes and polygons on a beige or light gray background. In a more modern setting, the Swedish military introduced the M90 in 1989, a pattern that is created from dark green, dark olive green, moss green, and khaki geometric polygons overlaid on each other. I won't go over any of these extensively today, but I will in the future if requested. Originally, I didn't know much about this camo pattern at all. I learned a good amount from sources such as Camopedia. The production of this video is going quite well and only including the Camopedia information since this topic was already so lightly touched on. Originally the video was going to be just about Splittermuster A and B. That is, until I stumbled on Frontal Filmwerk. During the Frontal Filmwerk video, he explained and showed many unique and interesting examples of prototype and Splittermuster variants created during World War II. The process of gaining this information from his video was a challenge because finding an English-speaking source that explained any of these unique or prototype Splittermuster variants mentioned in this video was scarce. Frontal Filmwerk spoke German in his video, and I had to translate a lot of that to English just to make this video. Next up, another big contributor to this, and I cannot thank enough, is the user Collection Steve on the IACMC forum. Both of these gentlemen links will be in the description. Lastly, I can't thank AveryGel14, aka the local Lithuanian on Instagram, for not only helping me write and polish the script, also provide better information on the subject than what I had started with. I'll be linking his Instagram in the description as well. Well guys, I can't thank you enough if you sat through this entire video. Because the Splittertarn video did so well and so many people mentioned how much they enjoyed that style of video, I eventually want to branch out and keep researching, reviewing, and documenting the history of camos and maybe other content such as weapons or combat gear. The next video is actually already in the works, so stay tuned for that. If there are any mistakes or historical inaccuracies in this video, please leave the correct information in the comments so others alongside myself can learn more about the topic as well. I did make sure to have as many references as possible to back up these claims, but even that can be incorrect. Also, if you have any other critiques or whatnot, please do comment so I can make these videos better for the viewers.